You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let's spend some time, if we can, talking about biblical archaeology. And if you find yourself saying, I'd kind of like to follow this along, or I'd like to read it for myself, or I'd like to pass it on to a friend, maybe a little bit skeptical about the historical accuracy of the Bible, this one is just a brief summary put together by Gordon Govrier, who, by the way, has been on the program with us. Been a number of years. Maybe we need to connect up with him again. He oftentimes is more of a reporter, but looks like he's working in a number of other areas as a magazine editor and also an executive producer, interesting enough, of a radio program called The Book and the Spade. So I might find out a little bit more. This is his kind of top 10 discoveries of 2018. So I'm going to go through this. But along the way, even if you're reading this or printing it out or following it on our screen, you'll notice I'll digress from time to time because I have some other articles. And at the end, even though these are the top 10, there were a couple that I've talked about on this program that have been talked about on the Breakpoint program as well by our good friend Eric Metaxas that I thought we would add to the mix as well. So it might take a little bit of time here. Archaeology sometimes can be kind of boring if you do it, if you've ever been over to Israel. And I might mention, even as we're talking about this, that we do have a planned trip to Israel next October. Now would be a good time to schedule that and to actually send in your deposit if you'd like to be with us. But if you go over there and look at some of the archaeological digs, it is pretty tedious. Sometimes in the summer when we have interns over there, it's pretty hot too. I've been there sometimes even in May where it was just unbelievably hot. And it's real difficult because you're sifting through things to find a shard of pottery or something like that. And most of the time it's pretty perfunctory kinds of things. But nevertheless, I'm going to give you some examples of some discoveries that took place in 2018 that are kind of significant. He counts them down 10 to 1, just the way David Letterman used to and everything else. So number 10, biblical Jerusalem inscription on an ancient column. It talks about the fact that archaeologists uncovered an inscription on a pillar in an excavation of an ancient potter's village, which is kind of near the western edge of where the modern city of Jerusalem is today. The inscription includes the word Jerusalem, which is, of course, the name of Jerusalem written in Hebrew. And this takes place in what's called a potter's village. No doubt probably served many of the pilgrims who were on their way to the temple in Jerusalem. So this was sort of, if you will, on the outskirts. But it might have been a place where individuals that had broken a piece of pottery, needed some for a sacrifice or one way or another were going to Jerusalem. As a result, this is where this was an opportunity for them to sell pottery being made there. And I love how Gordon mentions that. It says it calls to mind the potter's field. Where's the potter's field? Well, that's in Matthew 27, which was bought by the priest with the money Judas took for betraying Jesus and then returned. You might remember those very specific prophecies in the Old Testament actually were literally fulfilled in buying that potter's field for 30 pieces of silver. It wasn't 29 pieces, it wasn't gold, it was 30 pieces of silver, which were used to buy a potter's field. So in some respects, we even have a reference in the scriptures about a potter's field. This is obviously a different one, no doubt, but it's just an illustration again of seeing the name Jerusalem there on that particular pillar there in something that has been excavated. Number 9, a clay pomegranate found at Tel Shiloh. Now, Tel Shiloh is the site where the Jewish tabernacle and the Holy Ark of the Covenant were located between the Israelite conquest and the building of the temple in Jerusalem. And so that's a particular archaeological dig yielded an unusual clay pomegranate in an excavation this year. In the Bible, the pomegranate is kind of a common decoration used for the temple. You can see that in 1 Kings 7. You can see that in 2 Kings 25. And we see that small pomegranate decorations hung from the hems of the priest. You see that in Exodus 28. So again, you see just again a verification for some of the descriptions being provided in the Old Testament about what was taking place in the place where the Ark of the Covenant resided before it was placed in the temple. which, of course, happened much later. Number 8, Esarhaddon inscriptions found in the shrine of Jonah. In 2014, ISIS blew up the shrine of the tomb of the prophet Jonah in the Iraq city of Mosul. The now destroyed Muslim shrine had been situated on a mound where archaeologists soon found the remains of a palace of the Assyrian king Esarhaddon. The king's name is referenced in inscriptions discovered in tunnels ISIS dug into the mound as the group searched for artifacts to sell on the antiquities market. Today, archaeologists are using these tunnels to investigate the temple remains. Now, we have numerous references in the Old Testament to Esarhaddon. For example, those are talking about the assassination of his father, Sennacherib. You may remember that in 1 Kings 19, Isaiah 37, to mention a few examples there, who was the king who ravaged much of Hezekiah's kingdom of Judah and unsuccessfully besieged Jerusalem. Now, Esarhaddon ruled and reigned from about 681 to 669 B.C., and information archaeologists discovered in the remains of the palace will tell us more about sort of the latter days of the kingdom of Assyria. That happened in the time of Jonah, who lived almost a century earlier and whose actual final resting place is unknown. And what I found, if I can digress for just a minute, is that this is an example of where ISIS was really trying to just destroy everything and find some artifacts, but accidentally corroborates the Bible. This particular article comes from Facts and Trends, which has the title I love, ISIS Accidentally Corroborates the Bible. When fighters for the terrorist organization ISIS destroyed numerous biblical archaeological sites in Iraq, it says, they unknowingly unearthed evidence supporting the Old Testament accounts. Previously, archaeological teams stopped digging under certain sites in Iraq, such as what has been considered the traditional tomb of Jonah the prophet, for fear of destroying them. Now, again, we can say that's been the tradition. That's where Jonah was buried. Is that verifiable? I don't know that it is, but it's always been the tradition that this was the tomb of Jonah the prophet, the Jonah that you read about in the Old Testament. But nevertheless, let me continue on, because when ISIS fighters took over Mosul and other Iraqi areas, they had no such qualms, so they demolished the tomb of Jonah, dug tunnels really looking for, as we just mentioned a minute ago, various artifacts that they could sell to finance the terrorist organization of ISIS. And once the Iraqi army rooted out ISIS earlier this last year, archaeologists began checking the historic sites to see how much damage was done. And what they found was a previously completely untouched Assyrian palace in the ancient city of Nineveh. Today, Mosul is the name, but it actually is the ancient city of Nineveh. And they found all sorts of inscriptions that corroborate biblical accounts. One article that was in a magazine in Iraq and an archaeological journal, also published by Cambridge University, found, for example, that it gives the order of the Assyrian kings in the same order that is given in the Bible. You have, first of all, Sargon II, and that's the Sargon you see in Scripture, which you see in Isaiah 20. Then Sennacherib, I just mentioned a minute ago, and you read about him in 2 Kings 18, 2 Chronicles 32, and Isaiah 36 and 37. Then you have the one I just mentioned a minute ago, Esarhaddon, and that's again in 2 Kings 19, in Isaiah 37. And then Ashurbanipal, I believe that's right, and that you read about in Ezra 4:10. And so it also has some other references to the city of Keilah, which is in Genesis 10, and also the resettlement of the Assyrians, which we read about in Ezra 4:10. This is a good example where ISIS was not trying to do archaeological work, just the opposite. It was blowing up some of these ancient tombs and shrines, but because they did so, they unknowingly, accidentally corroborated the Bible. And this new article coming out here, archaeologists find biblical evidence under Jonah's tomb. Just a couple of other articles that I can add to the one that we've been working our way through. But if you've been paying attention, we've only looked at 3 of the 10. So when we come back, we'll try to figure out a few of these others. But I wanted to digress, especially on that particular one, because even though ISIS was trying to destroy everything, they opened up some investigation which gives further corroboration to the biblical text. When we come back, we'll talk about some other finds in Egypt, in Megiddo, even on the Temple Mount, and even the Pontius Pilate seal ring. All that coming up right after these important messages.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God, but what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate 2 replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, talking a little bit about archaeology, and I did check with everybody to see if anybody's fallen asleep. Sometimes archaeology can be a little bit boring, especially if you try to go to a dig and sift it through. But I think some of this is fascinating because it does, once again, establish the historical accuracy of the Bible. At the moment, we're talking about some of these things in the Old Testament, but before we're done, we'll also talk about at least one or two in the New Testament. And I thought I would add to the top 10 discoveries of 2018 in biblical archaeology to add a couple of others that our good friends there at Breakpoint Commentary have put together. Most of those done either by John Stonestreet, most of them by Eric Metaxas. I love Eric Metaxas. The other day says, you know, if I had to do all over again, I'd be an archaeologist. I can't see Eric Metaxas as an archaeologist. Can you see him at a dig making jokes the whole time and running around? But nevertheless, he certainly appreciates it. And I thought if you have never had somebody sit down and just talk about some of the latest archaeological finds that validate the Bible, we would go through those. So we've covered 10, 9, and 8. Let's go to 7. And this one is going to involve a word you probably don't hear every day, Semitic abecedary found in Egypt. Now, you might say, what's an abecedary? Or abecedary, I've heard it pronounced that way as well. That's where you have the letters of the alphabet in that particular language. And this is kind of intriguing there as well. Again, Gordon Gouverneur talks about the fact that biblical history intersects multiple times with a history of writing, as illustrated by an inscribed piece of limestone discovered in a tomb along the west bank of the Nile. Now, the University of British Columbia Egyptologist Thomas Schneider has deciphered the letters and announced this year that it's an abecedary, a very early version of the Semitic alphabet in ABC order. And you see these, you've seen these in Semitic languages, we've seen them in Latin and other places, and it turns out that this is a tomb that dates back to 1450 BC. Why is that important? Oh, that's the time of Moses, according to biblical chronology. And then it suggests that what is written in Exodus 24 could indeed be accurate, because in Exodus 24:4 it says Moses wrote down everything the Lord had said, but it is one of those things that has been challenged. I know when sometimes I talk about alleged errors in the Bible, I have a presentation that I do. Maybe we need to do it again on the program here. It's been a couple of years since I've done it. One of the arguments against the book of Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, Leviticus, Numbers is the Torah, supposedly mostly written down by Moses. The skeptics oftentimes say, well, there wasn't even writing back then. Now, my quick answer to that is, well, wait a minute. Have you ever heard of the Code of Hammurabi? That one was written down. Okay, so that's obviously written. Where did Moses study? At insignificant school? No, he studied at probably the best place to learn in Egypt at the time, and probably did have facility with language and writing. And in Exodus, it specifically says that Moses wrote everything down the Lord had said, and he wasn't the only one writing in a Semitic script in Egypt at that time. So finding this abecedary is really kind of another sort of ancillary but significant answer to that question as to whether or not Moses wrote down what we today consider the first 5 books of the Bible, the Torah. Number 6 is unlooted royal family tomb in Megiddo, a Canaanite tomb excavated at Tel Megiddo. And by the way, you might say, Megiddo, that sounds familiar. Yes, well, there is a valley by Megiddo, which is going to be the battle of what? Armageddon. That's where that name comes from. But anyway, in the tomb that was excavated there, they announced earlier this year that it revealed new information about the inhabitants of one of the more famous and important ancient sites in the region. At the original announcement last March, archaeologists marveled that a 3,700-year-old tomb was still intact and unlooted, yielding the remains of a man, a woman, a child, all adorned with gold and silver jewelry. Now, this, of course, is one of the other problems in archaeology, and, of course, you probably have figured that out a long time ago, whether you've watched some of these various fictional stories or whether you've even watched documentaries. You know that especially in Egypt and in many other places, any tomb usually is looted because they are able to find areas, those that are collecting it, trying to sell things. And so whether it's an Indiana Jones story or one of the other many stories along with that, you know that it is pretty rare these days to actually come to a tomb that is intact and unlooted. And this is why the find up there in the so-called Shrine of Jacob is so important, because nobody had dug underneath it. And by doing so, they were able to find some things that were not there as well. But in this particular royal family tomb at Megiddo, archaeologists expected to learn much more about the Canaanite culture that existed in Israel during the time of the patriarchs. And indeed, just a few weeks ago, it was reported that residue in one of the jugs from the tomb was discovered to be vanilla, which was not thought to have been known nor used in that part of the ancient world at that time. And if nothing else, it illustrates one more example of kind of a robust spice trade that took place during that particular time and in that location. Okay, number 5, the Becca weight from the Temple Mount. Very extra careful processing of archaeologically recovered dirt during what's called the wet sifting process has resulted in tiny but very significant discoveries, such as the Becca weight announced recently. In Exodus 38:26, the Becca was used to measure the half-shekel temple tax due from the members of the community. This is a tiny weight, about 5.5 grams or maybe 0.2 of an ounce, was inscribed with the Hebrew spelling Becca, was discovered in excavations near Robinson's Arch, if you know where that is, which we actually go and visit when we make a tour of Israel, which is in the southwest corner of the Temple Mount, and was believed to actually weigh the temple tax during the first temple period. So we have that. A couple more real quickly before we take a break. Number 4, Governor of Jerusalem's seal impression, and that is in 2017, while cleaning out just the dust between the stones in the wall there in Jerusalem, archaeologists discovered a biblical title, heretofore untested by archaeology. It says, the governor of the city. Now, in the so-called freedom coins, we've found the same kind of thing. So as a result, we now have archaeological evidence that indeed these individuals were called governors. You might say, why is that significant? Well, a governor of the city, much like a modern mayor, is mentioned in 2 Kings 23, where the author lists a man named Joshua, not Joshua of Moses' day, but Joshua, who had a similar name, as the governor of the city in the days of Hezekiah. We also have, interesting enough, in 2 Chronicles 18, where the author notes Amnon as the governor of the city in the days of Jehoshaphat. So now we have independent verification that indeed this idea of a governor of Jerusalem is actually demonstrated in some of these various things that have been discovered there as well. Then a third one that would be important is the signature of Isaiah the prophet in a seal. This one I think is kind of intriguing as well, because this one also our good friends at Breakpoint have talked about this, because as a result, we now are starting to see that there is a seal impression which was discovered this year with the actual name of one of the most important Old Testament prophets, and that is Isaiah. It says Isaiah the prophet, and as a result, they are assuming that this is indeed the same Isaiah that you read about in the Old Testament. One piece of evidence suggests the seal impression refers to the biblical prophet is a small piece of clay that archaeologists discovered in the region. This similar seal impression, which was found a number of years ago, says of King Hezekiah of Judah, and King Hezekiah and the prophet of Isaiah are mentioned in the same verse 17 times in the Bible. So you have, again, what seems to be independent archaeological evidence of Isaiah. And again, this, if I can digress for just a minute, is something that a Breakpoint commentary talked about back in March of this year, where, again, according to the Biblical Archaeological Review, it does indeed seem like we are now having archaeological evidence and verification of the prophet Isaiah. Let's take a break. We have a couple more to cover just before the top of the hour, but taking you way a little bit through this issue of archaeology, which in every particular case verifies, corroborates, and even provides additional perspective on some of the things we have been talking about here on Point of View, especially in the Old Testament. We'll come back and pick out just a few more very interesting archaeological finds, and then at the top of the hour, we'll get into some of the issues in the news. All that coming up right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Since 2012, First Liberty Institute has been investigating the rise in the number and severity of domestic attacks on religion. Each year, that investigation is compiled into our annual survey. We started that survey because wherever we went, people would tell us that they didn't think there was a genuine threat to religious liberty in our country. We call it Undeniable, the Survey of Religious Hostility to Religion in America. In the past year, the total number of documented attacks on religious liberty has increased by over 15%. Over the past 5 years, we have seen an alarming 133% increase. Of the 1,400 cases documented in Undeniable, you will see a myriad of faiths represented: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh, among others. Religious hostility in America does not seem to discriminate. But there is hope. First Liberty is battling for religious freedom in court, but you can join that fight by simply educating yourself and others about the rights we each have and how we can preserve them. If you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to go to firstliberty.org today and download your copy of the 2017 edition of Undeniable, or order a free copy for your friend. Despite the mounting hostility, First Liberty is prepared to stand against these relentless attacks for as long as it takes. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back for a few more minutes. Let me just mention the last few on this biblical archaeological top 10 discoveries of 2018. We've posted that on the website so you can read it more on your own. But as we go through that, I add a few others, and I will in just a few minutes mention a few more from our good friends at Breakpoint that I think have done a good job of adding to this very extensive list. But let me take a couple more. We just talked about Isaiah the prophet, perhaps in one of these seal impressions, and of course we'll see more later on, but the fact that with it we found evidence of an impression of King Hezekiah at the same time does suggest that indeed maybe there is a reference to Isaiah in that regard. But two more real quickly. First of all, the statue head of a biblical king from Abel Beth Mackay, and that is a discovery might have shot to the top of the list if it weren't for some way of identifying who this statue head depicts. He says there's no name or inscription. The best clue to his identity is the band around his head suggesting a crown. And this is a sculpture which was found at this particular site, which, interesting enough, this site is on the border between Israel and Lebanon. And every once in a while, I have people say, well, why are we proceeding on such a slow pace in terms of archaeology? Have you noticed some of the battles taking place in places like Lebanon, Syria, and a variety of other locations? Of course, that does kind of inhibit archaeological investigation. This particular site is one between Israel and Lebanon, but it caught the public's attention, he says, when it placed on display in the Israel Museum last summer. It dates to the 9th century BC, so it could depict a king of the northern kingdom. Could be Ahab or Jehu. Imagine if it was Ahab and Jezebel, but nevertheless, we'll talk about that. But it just as easily could be King Hazael of Damascus or one of the other kings, the father of Jezebel. So again, since we don't have the head, it's kind of intriguing, but we don't have any more evidence. But again, it's from that period, and just again gives us a little bit of a perspective on dress and crowns and those kinds of things, leading to the final one, which is actually from the New Testament. The name Pontius Pilate. Turns out we have a Pontius Pilate seal ring. That is the name of Pontius Pilate, he says, the Roman procurator who interrogated Jesus and then ordered him crucified, has turned up for a second time in the archaeological record. The first time his name and title were found engraved in a stone discovered in Caesarea Maritima. Now, if you ever want to go on our tour to Israel, or you go on some other tour, most of the time people fly into Tel Aviv, they go up to Netanya, and the first stop is Caesarea, which actually was a Roman colony. But one of the things that they do is they have a replica of that particular stone, which you can read for yourself, says Pontius Pilate. The actual stone you will see later if you go to Jerusalem, and you can see it in the museum. So, again, I might just mention, if you're interested in having a tour of Israel, this coming October, we're going to have a tour both of Israel and Rome. We always try to tie something together. Last time we did Israel and Greece, so it gave us a chance to kind of see where Jesus walked and where Paul walked. This time we're going to go Israel and Rome. Now you can come just to Israel or Israel and Rome. There, as you go to the website, pointofview.net, go to the section saying Take Action, go to Israel with Kerby Anderson, and you will see that that will take you to the information on the itinerary, the pricing, and it breaks down if you have miles and can get there by yourself. You'll see that that's a little less, or else the flight from Toronto, Canada, which is the way we're going to be going in, and then explanation of what the tour includes and those kinds of things. So if you have never been on a tour of Israel and like to join with us, we would love to have you. And as you go to Caesarea, the first thing we'll show you, after we go to the amphitheater, of course, and the hippodrome, is we'll show you where that particular stone shows that there is Pontius Pilate. Well, that certainly gave independent verification for Pontius Pilate, as if we needed additional one, but now we have something else. Scientists and archaeologists have now been able to excavate a place in the Herodium, which is a desert palace just outside of Bethlehem. And interestingly enough, as they've been able to do so, they actually found on a fairly badly corroded ring, but able using photographic techniques to actually see that indeed this is one that showed the importance of Pilate. The ring is copper alloy, so it's probably not fancy enough to actually have been worn by Pilate himself. More likely, probably worn by someone who was acting on the authority of Pilate, who would use the seal of the ring to actually create official communications. So if nothing else, just one more piece of evidence that indeed we have even in the New Testament archaeological discoveries that verify that. And just before we wind down, let me just mention that our good friends over there at Breakpoint Commentary, this one in particular here is one by Eric Metaxas, talking about the fact that we have discovered the vineyard of Naboth. Now, you might remember Naboth in 1 Kings 10, because we just mentioned a minute ago, Ahab wanted the vineyard, and as a result, Naboth wouldn't give it to him, so he had him killed and was able to take it over. And now it looks as if indeed we have indeed discovered the vineyard of Naboth, and so that's a fascinating answer to that one. Then John Stonestreet did one about the Tel Lachish. By the way, if you ever go to the Museum of the Bible in Washington, D.C., they've got a really good video. It's probably the first time I ever heard about the Tel Lachish. And here, one of the things they found is that there is a latrine at Tel Lachish. And you might say, what in the world is that all about? Well, it turns out that indeed, when there was an attempt to take down Hezekiah, to remove from the high places, smashing the sacred stones, cut down the Asherah poles, it also goes on to say that they actually had a seat carved of stone with a hole in the center, which was a toilet. And it turns out, some people talk about a throne. This is a different kind of throne, I guess it is. And so in 2 Kings 10, it talks about the fact that they demolished this and destroyed the temple of Baal and made it a latrine to this day. Well, now we have the latrine, if you will, that used to be part of the temple in 2 Kings chapter 10. And one last one that I have mentioned before, and that is now there are scientists that have also said that we have found evidence of a complete destruction of almost 200 square miles during the Middle Bronze Age, which rendered the area unsuitable for agriculture for about 6 years. And it was an explosion that literally leveled this area. Even those people hit by the hot, intense meteorite had the salt from the Dead Sea come upon them and turn them into a pillar of salt. And if that sounds familiar, this is why most of those people writing in the Biblical Archaeological Review say, we now think we have pretty good scientific evidence for the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. So just a couple of archaeological finds this last year. It's been a good year for archaeology. We'll see what this next year actually brings with it. And if you'd ever like to go to Israel, we certainly do encourage you to visit the website, pointofview.net. Go to the Take Action section, and you can find out more about this trip to Israel and Rome. You can go to just Israel or Israel and Rome, and I think you will really enjoy it. And I would love to meet you face-to-face and walk where Jesus walked and walk where Paul walked as well. To go into the Colosseum, to go into Capernaum, to go to Caesarea, of course, to go to Jerusalem, and to go to other places in Rome. So, again, we're looking forward to that, and that will be taking place later this year. But we need to take a break. There's a lot to cover in the news, so I hope that you didn't mind having a little bit of an archaeological investigation. I thought it would be appropriate, given the fact that this is a very good year for archaeology. We'll see what 2019 brings, and we'll take our break and then come back with more right after this.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151, or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221, Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View will continue after this.
just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me. And first of all, Happy New Year, the first live broadcast of 2019. And as we go through this, we might look back a little bit at 2018, but we're moving ahead, and certainly want to thank those of you that have supported this ministry. We'll give you a little bit of an update on how we did financially, but it looks good. Not great, but good, and we'll take good anytime, given all the things that are happening right now. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. I might just, as a program note, mention that all of you that hear this program don't necessarily hear the hour that happens before, because that's more of a local program that we do. But I did spend a fair amount of time in the last hour on the subject of archaeology. And so I just thought I might mention that in case any of you are interested in that. Matter of fact, the first article that we've posted on our website is 2018 Discoveries in Archaeology. And so I spent some time talking about that. And if you are interested in archaeology, certainly I hope that you'll visit the website pointofview.net and watch it. Of course, you can go to Facebook Live or even the YouTube channel and watch it there. But also, of course, you can read some of the material we've posted. And I might just mention that even as we did that, one of the things I would love to mention for you is to consider maybe the possibility that you could join with us in our trip to Israel, which will be taking place in October. This year we're going to Israel and Rome. Now you can go just to Israel alone, and that's a little less expensive, or Israel and Rome. Of course, there are various options, whether or not you have miles and want to fly there on your own, or whether you want to fly with us from Toronto, Canada, which is the way we're going to be going this time. And, of course, this is something I like to do from time to time. Last time we went to Israel and Greece, just a lot of fun. To walk where Jesus walked, walk where Paul walked. This time we'll have a chance to see where Paul was imprisoned. We'll see the Colosseum, a number of things. And, of course, we'll spend a fair amount of time everywhere from Caesarea to Jerusalem, the Dead Sea, Masada. There's just a lot. And so you can find out more by going to the website pointofview.net. Click on that section in the middle there. It says Take Action, Go to Israel with Kerby Anderson, and we would love to have you if you can come. Let me now get into some of the issues in the news. We have a lot to cover over the next couple of hours, and of course the issue of immigration and the wall front and center. President Trump today stood by his demand that he still wants $5 billion in border wall funding, and of course has met with Nancy Pelosi, who's now back from her Hawaii vacation, and Chuck Schumer. And he'd made a case that even during the so-called Christmas break that he would stay at the White House, not go to Mar-a-Lago. You may have seen the story that came out erroneously saying that he says he's in the Oval Office, but he really isn't, because I don't see a Marine stationed outside the door of the Oval Office. Well, that didn't take long for one of the White House staff to say, wait a minute, I'm looking in right now. I can see him in the Oval Office working. This is, again, fake news. So, nevertheless, he wanted to meet with them, but we had to wait till the 2nd of January to have the next meeting, which I predict went nowhere. We'll find out more in just a little bit. But the Democrats had suggested that they could end the shutdown by passing a bill that did not include border wall funding. But that, I think, is a non-starter. White House Press Secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders said that the Democrat plan is a non-starter because it does not include wall money to keep American families safe from human trafficking, drugs, and crime. Love to get your comments on that because I think most Americans, if I've read the surveys carefully, believe that the shutdown is due to Donald Trump. And even though Donald Trump is convinced that eventually he will be vindicated from that, a percentage blame the Democrats for not being willing to cut loose $5 billion. But nevertheless, this happens at an inopportune time, to put it mildly, which brings me to a piece by Derek Hunter, which I thought was well said, because even the other day when we had Penna Dexter and Nick Pitts with us, we found that there were some questions being raised of why now? And I think Derek Hunter raises the same question, because he says, as we look back over the year of 2018, we see it as a year of disappointments, missed opportunities, and ultimately failure on behalf of the Republican Party. None were larger than the failure to build a wall to help secure our southern border. So you can see where he stands on the issue. But he says, Derek Hunter says, it's popular among elected Republicans to blame Democrats for this failure, but they own it. And they lost control of the House of Representatives, he says, in part because of it. Republicans had control of both houses of Congress, though you wouldn't know it from the legislative perspective. Major campaign promises resulted in very little successful action, and while Democrats were committed to not helping, the Republicans had no one to blame but themselves. And so he says a small percentage of the government remains shut down as we prepare for 2019 in a fight over funding for a border wall. Democrats will never agree to the $5 billion President Donald Trump wants, at least not now. The shutdown may end up yielding some nominal money, he says, but that will be billed as a victory by the White House, but it really won't be one. And, of course, Democrats take control of the House. That happens tomorrow, by the way. Nancy Pelosi will have her hands on the Speaker's gavel. Wait until the end of the year to push this fight was the biggest political miscalculation of 2018. Matter of fact, Derek Hunter goes on to say it's really tough to call it a miscalculation or even a mistake. It wasn't like Washington was overwhelmed with other legislative priorities this year. It's just that a wall wasn't actually a legislative priority at all, not from Congress, not from the White House. They all talked a good game, he says. Republicans campaigned in support of a wall, as did a couple of Democrats. He says West Virginia Senator Joe Manchin comes to mind. And the president mentioned his signature 2016 campaign promise as he crisscrossed the country holding rallies in support of Republican candidates. But true priorities aren't reserved just for the campaign trail. They're fought for continually, and no Republican did that. If Republicans had been smart, which we know they weren't, he says, we wouldn't be having a shutdown a week before Democrats take over the House. We would have had a fight in September before the midterms, it is possible, when at least significantly more now, for there might have been then 60 votes in the Senate for cloture on wall funding. So many Democratic senators were up for re-election in states President Trump won, it would have been possible to peel them off for at least a vote to end the filibuster. But Republicans weren't pushing funding a wall in September or October or any time this year until it was beyond the point of possible, which leads me to believe they weren't serious about one in the first place. Maybe not, but nevertheless, that's kind of his assessment of where we find ourselves. And again, the arguments that keep coming in are hard to take real seriously. That we don't have the money. We had the most successful first month of the fiscal year in the history of this country. And we have a budget that now this year, the budget for the federal government, when we count everything, Social Security, Medicare, everything, $4.1 trillion. If you look at just the spending part of it, $1.6 trillion. In either case, $5 billion is a rounding error. Then to say, well, it doesn't work, well, look how it has worked. We can use examples as we did the other day. Hungary, Israel, even the United States. Or that it's xenophobic or it's immoral. We've heard those comments from Nancy Pelosi. But nevertheless, I'd love to get your comments. And it's one of the things we do address in our little booklet here, which is entitled A Biblical View on Immigration. And as we get into the new year, I hope some of you might even consider supporting this ministry, because we send those booklets to individuals that support us on a significant amount each month. And I'll talk more about that in just a minute. Let's take a break. Mitt Romney has a few things to say about the president. We want to talk about that right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In this new year, churches face a number of threats. The Alliance Defending Freedom is warning churches of 7 threats to their religious liberty. Pastors and their congregations need to know what these threats are and be prepared and protected. Now, one threat to pastors is the potential loss of a provision that treats housing for pastors as tax exempt. This has been threatened for many years, but faces a major challenge by the Freedom from Religion Foundation in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. A second threat affects the relationship of churches to the IRS. Currently, churches are exempt from the requirement to file a Form 990. Filing such forms can reveal private donor information. If that case is lost, churches would be forced to disclose private giving information to the public. A number of churches already face significant challenges from local government in their area. Churches in some areas have been denied the use of public facilities that other organizations are granted access. ADF talks about one case that has big implications for church plants and other small churches that cannot otherwise afford to build. In other cases, local government has used discriminatory zoning codes that override the rights of churches, blocking them from using buildings they already own. This year, your church may be facing the prospect of having to pay a parking tax. This was included in the Federal Tax Cuts and Job Act and applies to churches and ministry employees. Finally, there have been a number of cases in which government officials try to intimidate churches and pastors with letters and warnings about what pastors can say about political issues. Pastors and churches need to be aware of these threats and take appropriate action. I would encourage you to support some of the religious liberty organizations fighting for you and your rights. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Shutdown still taking place, and of course a real ongoing battle about immigration, really in this sense right now the battle over a border wall, but the long-term question about immigration, which relates to a variety of different things, not just a wall on the southern border, but also dealing with certain issues ranging from the fact that 40% of people that are here illegally come from overstaying their visas, so the need to really address that issue. Also, the concern that an individual that has lived here for many, many years has never broken the law and is a good citizen in the sense that they have done the kinds of things we would expect American citizens to do, but still is in the shadows. Is there going to be a path to citizenship for them? So there are just all sorts of issues that we can talk about. And if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. But another issue that has surfaced primarily because incoming Senator Mitt Romney from Utah decided to write a piece, and I have it in front of me here, in the Washington Post. Mitt Romney says the president shapes the public character of the nation. Trump's character falls short. Now, before I read parts of it, and then the remarkable response from everybody, from somebody in the Republican National Committee to his, I guess it was his niece. Isn't that interesting? I did want to say that whenever we talk about a particular candidate or even a person in the presidency, in the ideal situation, you would like an individual that on the issues really agrees with you, on the kind of people that he or she puts in positions of leadership, This is especially true for a governor or a president, but even true oftentimes for a U.S. senator or a member of Congress. Who's your chief of staff? Because if you have quality people next to you, they're going to give you good information. And then number 3, the issue of character. You would hope that you would have somebody of good character. In the best of all worlds, you want 3 out of 3. Sometimes we're lucky if we get 2 out of 3 or 1 out of 3. And it's interesting that Mitt Romney kind of acknowledges that in some respects, at least on the policy issues, the president has done pretty well. But on the personnel issues, he was more encouraged by the people he used to have in office with him in his cabinet than he has now. And, of course, you already figure out what he thinks about character. So let me read just a little bit, and then I'll take some phone calls. 1-800-351-1212 if you'd like to comment on the debate about immigration and the wall. And I suspect some of you are going to have some comments about Donald Trump's character. And since Mitt Romney raised it, it's on the topic. And he says the Trump presidency made a deep descent in December. The departures of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis, White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, the appointment of senior persons of lesser experience, the abandonment of allies who fight beside us, and the president's thoughtless claim that America has long been a sucker in world affairs all defined his presidency down. So we kind of know where Mitt Romney stands on this. He says it's well known that Donald Trump was not my first choice as presidential nomination. And he says after he became the nominee, I hoped his campaign would refrain from resentment and name calling. It did not. But he said, after he won the election, I thought that maybe he would rise to the occasion. And he said his early appointments of Rex Tillerson, Jeff Sessions, Nikki Haley, Gary Cohen, H.R. McMaster, Kelly, and Mattis, the ones he just mentioned a minute ago, were encouraging, but on balance, his conduct over the past 2 years, particularly his actions last month, is evidence that the president has not risen to the mantle of the office. And he then goes on to give credit where I think credit is due, and that is, he says, not all the president's policies have been misguided. Well, again, he'd be better served if he were to say most of his policies have been on target, but nevertheless. And he talks about corporate taxes. He talked about stripping out excessive regulations. He's talking about cracking down on China's unfair trade practices to reform criminal justice, appointing conservative justices. That's a pretty good list, by the way, for 2 years, given the fact that he couldn't really get anything accomplished through Congress. But Mitt Romney only gives begrudging acknowledgement there, but then goes on to say, to a greater degree, the president shapes the public character of the nation. A president should unite us and inspire us to follow our better angels. A president should demonstrate the essential qualities of honesty and integrity and elevate the national discourse with comity and mutual respect. And he says, then, even as we look overseas, the world is also watching. America has long been looked to for leadership. And so he goes on for 2 pages talking about some of his concerns about the president. You might say, why now? Well, I think there is the possibility that, as some people have suggested, that he might actually think it's worth running against Donald Trump in the primaries. And one member of the Republican National Committee, Javon Williams, wrote that Romney could be using loopholes in the nominating process to openly challenge the president's renomination in 2020. And he says, and this is the comment from the RNC member, this would feed Romney's fantasy of being president, even if that means destroying our party and denying President Trump's reelection. And then he says, with Republicans like him, who needs Democrats? So that's a response from one of the members of the Republican National Committee. But interestingly enough, the chairwoman of the Republican National Committee, Ronna McDaniel, actually criticized Mitt Romney as well. And I thought it was kind of interesting because her uncle is Mitt Romney, which I thought was really interesting. But nevertheless, again, this has come out. McDaniel was saying that, again, this attacking Trump's temperament and character certainly was not helpful and seems unfettered by the fact that Romney is her uncle, called him out on Twitter for being disappointing and unproductive. So, love to get your comments. I think over the next couple of days, we're going to be hearing all sorts of conversation, not just about whether or not we're going to build a wall and whether or not we're going to have a government shutdown, but all sorts of discussions about the character of Donald Trump. And so I'd love to hear your comments. 1-800-351-1212. We've also put the issue of immigration on the table, so let's start with that one. Randy, listening on the internet out of Missouri. Randy, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I'd like to chime in about immigration. As we're having this conversation, we know about this other large caravan that's mounting down in Honduras, supposed to be reportedly 15,000 strong. But we have people coming over the border every day. We have mass amounts of people coming over the border every day. And there's this program that I've learned about called the United Nations Refugee Relocation Program, where people have been coming in periodically and being relocated into our country. Refugees being given benefits, SSI benefits, and the proper identifications. Right now, Europe seems to be on fire with all these riots, and a part of their issue isn't just this new tax on fuel, but this proposal of a United Nations migrant compact, where nations are signing on to taking on more refugees. Canada happens to be one of those,
right?
And these two United Nations programs are working hand in hand with NGOs. A lot of them are Christian-based, and I believe that these caravans are being aided and abetted through some of these NGOs. And I mean, they're not coming up on their own. They're being fed. They're being helped with transportation, all sorts of resources. That's already been documented very, very, very clearly. And we have a problem we got to deal with. And I don't know how much of the wall is going to fix this, but clearly cutting off benefits, government benefits to people that aren't citizens in our country would be a great start to ending the incentives. I believe Donald Trump made a commitment to ending the Anchor Baby program. That might be an issue that needs to be raised.
Birthright citizenship, yeah, and we've written about that before. You've got a good point, and I've got to come to a break. And Randy, you've raised good questions. First of all, I have in the past talked a little bit about some of the NGOs, the non-governmental organizations that have, in some cases, provided funding for the caravan. But let me see if I can maybe find another more up-to-date article and post it tomorrow, because that would be helpful, because a lot of people say, wait a minute, I've never heard that before. And, of course, some of the attempts to resettle people in this country were really provided under the Obama administration. And I suspect the Trump administration would like to curtail some of that. But wherever you stand on the issue, one of the articles that we quoted just the other day points out that right now the United States has a larger immigrant population than any other country, probably in round numbers about 47 million immigrants. This represents about almost 20% of the 244 million international migrants worldwide. And so that's looking at a larger number than just those who are here illegally. If you look at the broader picture, it's a significant number. But we need to take a break. We'll come back and continue our discussion right after this.
There is no more dangerous time than when things are going well. Remember Elijah on Mount Carmel? Fire came down. There was no doubt who was God. But what happened next? He went from amazing faith to a time of great fear and depression. Many Christians have been very thankful a certain Democratic candidate for president was not the one to nominate two replacements for the Supreme Court. But as with Elijah, times of great victory are also times of great danger. Moments like this are not the time to take it easy. This is not the time to let our guard down. This is a time to double down on our work in the community, to serve and pray and plan and invest in a better future. This is the time to join Point of View's Truth Team 360 to make sure today's promising gains are not lost tomorrow. Show your commitment to our future by visiting pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. Ask to join the Truth Team. Pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Talked a little bit about immigration. We'll take another call on that. And then, of course, the whole character of the president, which Mitt Romney has raised. And I think it's an important question to raise because we would like the president to be a person of good character. He has not in many occasions. We talk about that so often here on the program. We may like some of the policies that have been implemented. We like some of the judges and justices that have been put on the court. but we don't like the things that he says in his tweets and the way he bullies people. And so I'd love to get your comments on that. But also, we've posted some other articles. A very good piece that came out by our friend John Stossel. Sweden isn't a socialist country. And so often we have our friends who are promoting socialism say, well, if you want to understand what socialism looks like, don't look at Venezuela, don't look at Cuba, look at Sweden. Sweden's a socialist country, and it's the fourth most prosperous country in the world. Well, as you're going to find in just a minute from not only his column, but also this excellent documentary, which I would encourage you to watch. It's free on YouTube, so you can watch it all the way, called Sweden Lessons for America. And a lot of that comes from a Swedish historian, Johan Norberg, which he also has interviewed on Stossel TV, really kind of sets aside the idea that Sweden is a socialist country. We also have one on Constitution and free speech, which I'll save maybe to the next hour. And then a piece, obviously intended to be provocative, by Walter Williams. Walter Williams, a very good columnist and an economist who is African-American and sometimes likes to stir the pot, and has done so with his column, Enemy of the Black People, the worst enemy of the black people. And, of course, he's not thinking about what most people would mention, but he will certainly get us having a conversation about that as well. So those are just a couple of articles that we have posted here as well. So we'll certainly do our best to take some of your phone calls and give you a chance to hear some very important issues that are going to be developed over the next couple of months, when we have now Democrats in control of the House of Representatives, Republicans retaining control in the Senate, and, of course, Donald Trump as president. We'll also, of course, be looking at other issues, as I mentioned just a few minutes ago on the last hour in our local show. I did almost an entire hour just on archaeological finds that confirm the Bible. So if you're interested in that, you might want to visit the website and watch that, or even read the first article we've posted here on 2018 discoveries in archaeology that verify the Bible. So we've got lots of great material that we will be covering every day. Nick Pitts normally would be sitting here, but at the last moment was called away. So I'm sitting here today on our Wednesday roundtable, and certainly glad to take your phone calls. So let's go back to the phones. In the state of Texas, Ann, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
Hi. On Friday, I tried to call you all, but it was your last program, and I didn't catch you. But I was sitting at home, and all of a sudden, the scripture came to me about the wall. And in Revelations 21, the 7th verse says, "He that overcometh shall inherit all things, and I will be his God, and he shall be my son. But the fearful and unbelieving and the abominable and murderers and whoremongers and sorcerers and idolaters and all liars should have their part in the lake of fire." That shows a restriction to heaven for people that are not godly. And then on the 12th verse, it says, "And had a wall great and high, and had 12 gates." And so if heaven has gates and walls, what about the United States?
Well, it sounds like a good argument. You know, and I've had people mention that before, that, you know, we do have a wall in heaven. The new heaven, new earth will have a wall, but it also has a door, which I think implies that we will not be locked into heaven. We'll be able, I suspect, this is just speculation, that we'll be able to explore the universe. We'll be no longer bound by all the kind of constraints we are bound by that time. But again, whether you look at the scriptures, whether you look at history, look at the building of walls, you can't even imagine what a person in biblical times could even think about having an unwalled city. You know, one of the prophecies that talks about there will be unwalled cities. They knew that the walls were somewhat impregnable. Matter of fact, when Joshua comes against Jericho, many of them are faint of heart. They're looking at these walls and saying, there is no way we can get over these walls. And so the walls there were to protect them from foreign invaders. Walls are used oftentimes to protect countries from individuals that might intend them harm. I mentioned earlier that we're making a trip to Israel again, and one of the times when we will move from the northern part of Israel to the southern part, we'll go through what is essentially called today the West Bank or Samaria, and you will actually see, in some cases, fences or walls. Mostly you'll see the fences there. And you might say, well, the fence doesn't keep them out. Well, first of all, they use fences to keep people from being able to just walk across. Then they also smooth out all the sand to see if they see any footprints in the sand. Of course, they also use electronic surveillance. You can see other kinds of walls. I this year will be speaking again in Hungary. I teach at the Word of Life in Budapest, Hungary. And the president there in Hungary, who is similar in some respects to Donald Trump. It is amazing how some people have said he's kind of like a Hungarian Donald Trump. But when all these refugees were coming from Syria, he actually put up a wall. I think it was about 4 meters high, so about 12 feet, 15 feet high, that blocked off Syria from Hungary. And so then when the refugees and I'm not sure all of them were refugees, a lot of them were men who actually had no desire to do anything other than get the free benefits that they could eventually obtain, primarily in Germany. But then when they started to try to come in through Croatia, built a wall there. So we have all sorts of examples of walls being effective. And so we have walls in the Old Testament, we have walls in the New Testament, we have walls in heaven. So again, I don't know why a wall is so controversial, but it is. So that's where we find ourselves. If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. One of my commentaries next week is one where Michael Brown has talked about some of the questions he has about immigration, and some of them are, if illegal immigrants are flooding this country, what's so controversial about building a border wall? Another question was, since when has anyone been able to force us to take in immigrants, given the fact that we are a welcoming nation? I just gave you the figures back as of 2015, which is now almost 3 years old. We had at that time 47 million immigrants in this country. We have the larger immigrant population than any other country in the world. And so why are we all of a sudden being chastised because we're not taking in more? And, of course, as Randy just pointed out a minute ago, we're even taking in refugees that went to other countries come into this country. Third, he said, what's so controversial about wanting to preserve our national identity? And if you, again, see what has happened in some of the European countries when they've been sort of taken over by individuals that maybe are Muslim and do not accept some of the national ideas, you can see why we want to keep a national identity, why we want to bring people here, but also why we want them to assimilate with our culture. Just before we take a break, though, let me take one of the other articles I've posted here, and that is the question about Sweden isn't socialist, because as I've told you many times before, when we have individuals promoting socialism, they say, well, don't look at the failed experiments of socialism in Cuba or Venezuela. We should look at Sweden as proof that socialism works and brings about great prosperity. But that's not what the Swedish historian Johan Norberg says. He's featured in this documentary called Sweden Lessons for America. And again, you can find that on YouTube and watch the entire hour program. John Stossel does about a 5-minute interview with him on Stossel TV. But Johan Norberg, who's quite the expert on Swedish history, makes it clear that Sweden is not socialist, he says, because the government doesn't own the means of production. He says to see what you have to see socialism, you have to go to Venezuela or Cuba or North Korea. Now, he does admit, interestingly enough, that the country did have some kind of experiment with socialism a few decades ago, and he points out that the government at that time heavily taxed the citizens and spent heavily, and he points out that that was not a good period in Swedish history, especially for the economy. And one of the examples he used is Astrid Lindgren. You might remember she is the author of the popular children's books Pippi Longstocking. And because her books were so popular and sold so well, she experienced something that we have never seen in this country, and that is she had to pay a tax of 102% on any new Pippi Longstocking book that was sold, which just shows you what happened. And the reality is, if nothing else, these high Swedish taxes still were not enough to fund the huge welfare state. So as a result, finally, people had had enough, and they began to reduce the size and scope of the government. And they began to cut public spending, privatize the national rail network, abolish certain government monopolies, eliminated inheritance taxes. They even sold off state-owned businesses like the maker of Absolute Vodka. And in some respects today, Sweden is more a free market economy than even the United States. You can read the whole piece on our website, pointofview.net. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Since 2012, First Liberty Institute has been investigating the rise in the number and severity of domestic attacks on religion. Each year, that investigation is compiled into our annual survey. We started that survey because wherever we went, people would tell us that they didn't think there was a genuine threat to religious liberty in our country. We call it Undeniable, the Survey of Religious Hostility to Religion in America. In the past year, the total number of documented attacks on religious liberty has increased by over 15%. Over the past 5 years, we have seen an alarming 133% increase. Of the 1,400 cases documented in Undeniable, you will see a myriad of faiths represented: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh, among others. Religious hostility in America does not seem to discriminate. But there is hope. First Liberty is battling for religious freedom in court, but you can join that fight by simply educating yourself and others about the rights we each have and how we can preserve them. If you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to go to firstliberty.org today and download your copy of the 2017 edition of Undeniable, or order a free copy for your friend. Despite the mounting hostility, First Liberty is prepared to stand against these relentless attacks for as long as it takes. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Get to some of those phone calls. And again, some of the articles we posted, discoveries in archaeology, Sweden and socialism, which I just read. Next hour, we're going to talk about this piece by Walter Williams. Very well done. It's called The Worst Enemy of Black People. It really, in some respects, is educating all of us about Malcolm X. Now, I grew up during a time when Malcolm X was alive and speaking, but I learned a few things there, and also just a little bit more about what he referred to. That is Malcolm X, and of course Walter Williams refers to as one of the worst enemies of black people, so we'll get into that in the next hour. But some of you may have some comments about immigration, about the character of Donald Trump, about Sweden, socialism, and the rest. Let me just mention again, of course, we have these booklets, one on capitalism and socialism, which I think is really good to give to somebody who might think that socialism is better than capitalism. Of course, I mentioned the one on a biblical view of immigration. And I might just mention in passing, the latest one coming out is on drug abuse. And a little bit later, I'm going to be talking about a real concern surfacing as maybe the next major health care issue, because just as we have had these babies born without limbs because of thalidomide, Now, some of the drugs that are even being prescribed to some of these pregnant women could cause some problems. So we'll get into those in just a few minutes. But if you have comments about the character of Donald Trump and Mitt Romney, if you have comments about immigration, comments about socialism, we will take those phone calls. Let's focus first on the issue of immigration. And Jim in Michigan, WLJN, thank you for joining us today.
Hi. My comment's pretty quick. I think that the Democrat Party opposes the wall because they're afraid it will work.
I've said that before. You know, I
know.
You know,
well, I do
when you say it's not going to work,
program.
really, find me some place. I mean, I recognize a small wall and a large ladder and motivated people, sure. And I recognize that you cannot have a wall over 1,700 miles of the southern border. Nobody's calling for that. But I can point to you a few places where you have a very close proximity of Mexican cities and American cities and borders where it is almost possible to just literally walk across without any kind of investigation whatsoever. And so in those particular key areas, that would be the case. Now, if Nick Pitts were here, but he could not be here, lots of times he'll point out that, yes, we can also use drones and electronic surveillance and all the rest. Of course we can. But I do believe that sometimes the reason they don't want the wall is because they know it would work. They can't honestly, in a straight face, tell me that $5 billion is a lot of money. I mean, it is a lot of money for you and me, but it's not a lot of money for the federal government.
That's right. Also in California, I know that California aliens are able to get driver's licenses.
Sure. Well, and that's where
we're
and are able to vote in certain elections. I mean, we're kind of creating a de facto citizenship for people that are here illegally, and this is why we desperately need to have some immigration reform very quickly, because otherwise we'll just have these de facto situations with sanctuary cities, people getting driver's license, be able to vote in certain elections. You can see, and of course, the whole question of how they're going to be counted in the census and on and on. These are just big issues that need to be addressed, and I wish I could give you any kind of optimism that it's going to be addressed in this session of Congress, but I'm not sure that it will. We'll see.
Well, usually the Democrats overreach, and then a Republican gets elected. Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you bringing all those questions to the fore, and let's take a few more questions. One of those was the commentary today that appeared in the Washington Post by incoming Senator Mitt Romney about the character of Donald Trump. And Bill in North Carolina, I think you want to address that issue, so you have the floor.
Almost 95% accurate. I go back to when he debated Hillary Clinton, which was her biggest mistake, to debate a man with that low morals he has. But as of now, he's showed how dominant he is with his way by blackmailing this country for $5 billion, and that is a lot of money.
Well, it's a lot of money for you and me, but it's a rounding error for the federal government, unfortunately.
No, forget the federal government. Forget it's a $5 billion he says he has to have before he'll reopen the federal government. Now, we know he's going to reopen it, or someone is, but I hope he doesn't get one penny by trying to blackmail people. And he has shown this when he debated Hillary Clinton. He put her down. She should be shot. She should be put in prison. Well, that's the kind of person he is, because that's what he dwells on. And he will hurt this country more than we can take if he stays in office. And I'm just so depressed knowing a man like that can say he's the head of a country. I don't even call him what he is. He's just very bad news for this country. And he'll take it for everything he can, in my opinion, and we will suffer. And I hate narrow-minded Republicans who just go along with anything. Some have distanced themselves from him. Now, that Paul Ryan and the others has, and Jim McCain and all some of them. So he is not what we need, and he will take us down as low as we can go. And as far as the immigration people, as long as they're good citizens, that's the important thing. It doesn't matter if people live here 80 years. If they're not a good citizen, they shouldn't be here. If people want a good life and be a good citizen, I don't care where they're from. As long as they're a good citizen, they obey the laws as they should.
And one of the things, the fourth question, by the way, that we also have information about that is on one of my commentaries by Michael Brown is why would it be so hard to make a path for citizenship with penalties for those who came in illegally years ago but have been working jobs, obeying the laws, and contributing to the good of society? So that would be one of the things that the Democratic leadership in the House can do to solve this immigration crisis. We'll see whether that actually unfolds. I would like to be optimistic, but I'm not so sure. But let's take a few more phone calls here. Craig in New Hampshire, what would you like to add to our conversation today?
I wanted to add that the topic today is an answer to prayers, and also as far as the archaeological digs being sources to confirm the existence of the Bible, and also secondly, the topic of the wall has been something on my mind, so I'm glad to be on the air today. I'm thankful for the opportunity.
Well, appreciate you calling in, and if nothing else, we're really trying to cover a lot of different topics. We aren't going to get any movement, I don't think, on this issue of the wall or immigration, so I thought I'd bring it up for a little bit, which is why I like to talk about a couple of kind of theme issues, one of which is the issue of capitalism and socialism. Another one, of course, which we talked about in the very first hour on archaeology. But let's take a break, and when we come back, we're going to spend some time getting into a couple of other issues. We'll take a few more phone calls, and you are welcome to express your point of view, because that's the name of the program, Point of View. So let me again mention that as we come into this new year of 2019, one of the benefits that we give to those of you that actually support on a regular basis at $45 a month, we actually send these little booklets. I mentioned this one on capitalism and socialism, this one on immigration, one that is going to be coming out shortly on drug abuse, which we'll get into in the next hour, because there's some real concerns about some of these drugs and how this could be a major health crisis being described right now as the new medical epidemic. So we'll get into those issues. But I hope that as we come into this new year, you might consider not only supporting this ministry occasionally, but think about whether or not you could support on a monthly basis. And you can do that by going to the website, pointofview.net. Or, of course, even as we're going off the air for a few minutes, you can call the pledge line, 800-347-5151.
Is religious freedom still a cornerstone of the Republic, or has it effectively been crushed by the forces of tolerance? America needs Christians to be informed and as unified as possible, applying God's wisdom to civic life. Point of View can be a key part of a successful mission. I believe in America. I believe God wants His best for us. We can face whatever the world throws at us as long as we stand together. If you have not signed on, please do it now. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Set up your monthly gift by clicking the Truth Team 360 picture and then carefully follow the directions. Pointofview.net. By phone, you can give at 1-800-347-5151. 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Or call us 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do in keeping us informed.
Thank you, Kerby, for everything that you have been doing. I appreciate all the work that you're doing, advocating for the Word of God. Thank you so much.
Point of View, I think, is absolutely necessary because it's a Christian perspective, a biblical worldview perspective, and receive very current, up-to-date information about what is really going on, week to week in our culture, which is changing so rapidly, and yet it's morally sliding backwards.
Yeah, I'm just, first of all, I thank you guys. Y'all's program is wonderful, and enjoy it every day. I learn so much every time I listen to it.
Point of View Radio Talk Show.
Hi, this is Kerby Anderson. You know, each day we take on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View continues right now.
Across America, live. This is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
If you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. We put quite a number of things on the table. Talked about the issue of immigration. Of course, that is the booklet that we've made available to many of you. Also talked about capitalism and socialism. We've talked about the character of the president. Mitt Romney has certainly raised that issue. This hour, before we're done, I want to also get to the piece by Walter Williams, The Worst Enemy of Black People. Have one on free speech, and also just some material about a new teratogen in the drug issue. And that, of course, is the new booklet that'll be coming out shortly on a biblical point of view on drug abuse. So these are some things we make available to those of you that are regular donors. And while I'm talking about our finances, Warren Kelly just came in a minute ago, give me an update. As best as we can determine, we have had a very good December 31st in terms of those of you that have given online. We're still away from our goal, but if we look at what we need and compare it to the number of checks that came in December 31st last year, it looks like we might have made our goal. So I want to say thank you to that, and we'll let you know some of the final numbers as those checks arrive and as we do a final tally. But some of you might have wondered, well, did you make your goal? And I think the answer is yes. So that's encouraging to hear. Let me just mention, though, as we've talked about these booklets, that I hope some of you, as we start this new year of 2019, that you might consider supporting us on a monthly basis. I mean, I appreciate all the great gifts that come in December. We have a higher percentage of people that give in December than any other month, any other 2 or 3 months combined, by the way. But it would be nice if we could get to the point where we have monthly gifts to match the monthly expenses we have. You understand that. And so some of you might want to consider, as we start this new year of 2019, to actually be part of our Truth Team. For as little as $1 a day, $30 a month, you can be a partner with us. But again, at the higher level, $45 a month, you receive these booklets as well as, of course, the Outlook magazine and a variety of other resources. So again, hope you might consider what you might do to support this ministry. And I thank you for those of you that do support this ministry. We certainly don't say thank you enough. And when we get some final numbers, I'll be glad to report those to you as well. I'm all about transparency and letting you know as much as I can as soon as I find out. And just a few minutes ago, I got a little bit of an update on where we stand. And if those checks that come in on our mail are comparable to last year, and I would hope that they would be, then I think we've made our goal. So we'll see where we are on that. Let's go to some phone calls that are left over from the last hour in Georgia. Andy, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Hey, thanks for taking my call. I just wanted to quickly mention that states like California that welcome illegal immigrants would have you to believe that they're more humanitarian than the rest of us, when the truth of it is it's really about money and it's about power. Federal dollars follow bodies, bottom line. Dollars for reimbursement for Medicare visits to hospitals, dollars for aids for families with dependent children. All those federal dollars are not limited to citizens only. Secondarily, the electoral college is based on census count, not on voters. So states like California, with many more bodies to count, get more electors based on those bodies and therefore have greater power per actual voter. People don't understand that, and that's why they're so against asking in the census, are you or are you not a citizen? We haven't asked that now for over 50 years because they don't want people to be able to say, wait a minute, let's rethink how we parcel out electors who elect our president. So if you follow the money, in most cases, you'll get to the truth, or at least closer to it than they would have you to believe.
And you're looking at the quantity, which I agree with, but let me also talk about something else, the quality, and that is certain immigrants tend to more likely vote in the Democratic Party than other ones that be more likely to vote in the Republican Party. And the assumption has also been made that certain individuals, primarily from Latin American countries, but not exclusively, sometimes those from Germany and other places, would be more likely to vote Democratic. And so as a result, that's another secondary issue as well. So I think you got the first point, and I thought I'd just add the second point to it as well.
Yes, that's a good point. And, they win either way. If they can buy their vote, they will. If they can't, they've got their body, and they'll have federal dollars to follow that. If we went to California and said, take in all the people you want, but citizens of California have to pay for it exclusively, you would probably find a whole different situation at hand. But we are, as a country, subsidizing places like California who welcome all comers because we're paying it from a federal level.
Well, Andy, appreciate your phone call, and Happy New Year. Let's see if we can get a couple more phone calls here. Let's stay in the state of Georgia for another minute before we move on to some of the other places around the country. So, Betty, calling in from Georgia as well. What's your point of view?
Okay, I agree with everything Andy has just said. I'm a taxpayer, but first of all, I'm a Christian. And next, I believe God put our president in the White House because of the mess our country is already in. And I believe Satan is trying to stop everything he's trying to do. So, but I do, and I also would like, I would like to start supporting your station. I listen to you all the time on television. But for our wall and the Democrats, let me tell you, if you are a Democrat, and if you stand up and say, I'm a Democrat, but you will not support the taxpayers because the money and the power is coming from the taxpayer, and you do not support us, then Satan is in your life and blinding you. I mean, because God does not want us to live here with a half a country going one way and half the other way. And we're not supposed to have people just running over our country. And if you don't believe this, it's in the Bible. The Bible tells you if you don't work, you don't eat. Google it, you'll find out exactly where that's located.
First Thessalonians.
And people have gotten to where they're so greedy and so power hungry that they're running and destroying our country. And I support our borders.
Betty, appreciate your phone call. Let's take a break. When we come back, we will take some more phone calls. I see some of you want to talk about the shutdown. That's certainly fair game. Some of you want to talk about the character of Donald Trump. Some of you want to talk about the wall. All fair topics. And again, we also have addressed the issue of Sweden, whether it's a socialist, and that kind of brings us into if you're looking for an example of a successful Swedish country, it's hard to find, especially if you begin to understand that Sweden, which is oftentimes used by Bernie Sanders and others as the best example of a Swedish experiment. And then when you look at the material we've posted here today by Swedish historian Johan Norberg, which is in this new documentary, which you can watch on YouTube. You don't even have to pay for it. Sweden, Lessons for America, but also Stossel TV has it. And, of course, the column I have today by John Stossel is there as well. So you got a couple of good pieces that you can read. And a little bit later, before we end the program today, if we can have time, Walter Williams has written The Worst Enemy of Black People, and he is an African-American economist who is at George Mason, a very articulate individual. And I found this not only provocative, but also quite informative. There were some things about Malcolm X I did not know, so we'll get into that as well. Lots to cover. We always try to cover many different topics here on Point of View, and we'll continue to cover those topics right after this.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
In this new year, churches face a number of threats. The Alliance Defending Freedom is warning churches of 7 threats to their religious liberty. Pastors and their congregations need to know what these threats are and be prepared and protected. Now, one threat to pastors is the potential loss of a provision that treats housing for pastors as tax exempt. This has been threatened for many years, but faces a major challenge by the Freedom from Religion Foundation in the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. A second threat affects the relationship of churches to the IRS. Currently, churches are exempt from the requirement to file a Form 990. Filing such forms can reveal private donor information. If that case is lost, churches would be forced to disclose private giving information to the public. A number of churches already face significant challenges from local government in their area. Churches in some areas have been denied the use of public facilities that other organizations are granted access. ADF talks about one case that has big implications for church plants and other small churches that cannot otherwise afford to build. In other cases, local government has used discriminatory zoning codes that override the rights of churches, blocking them from using buildings they already own. This year, your church may be facing the prospect of having to pay a parking tax. This was included in the Federal Tax Cuts and Job Act and applies to churches and ministry employees. Finally, there have been a number of cases in which government officials try to intimidate churches and pastors with letters and warnings about what pastors can say about political issues. Pastors and churches need to be aware of these threats and take appropriate action. I would encourage you to support some of the religious liberty organizations fighting for you and your rights. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
Take Kerby and the Point of View team with you on the go with the Point of View app. Search for Point of View Radio at the Apple or Google Play stores.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, if you'd like to join our conversation, 1-800-351-1212. Let me just mention, those of you listening online probably heard my commentary today on threats to churches, and I want to give you an assignment because this actually looks at the 7 threats to churches in terms of religious liberty. It comes from our good friends at Alliance Defending Freedom. And it's kind of a brief summary. And so I would encourage you to go and read it. It's very easy to read because, again, the commentary is less than 2 minutes long. The actual written part of it, about 1 minute and 40 seconds. And you can read it in probably about a minute if you're a fast reader. But what you will find is that these are some things that I think church leadership needs to pay attention to. So my assignment for you today is go to our website, pointofview.net. Or to, if you already have signed up for this, to go to your inbox and find my article today, my commentary on threats to churches, and then think of somebody you might want to send it to. Might be the pastor of your church, might be an elder that you have an email for, or a deacon or somebody like that. And that's a way that we can just kind of educate them. They may not have a chance to listen to Point of View, but I do believe there are some threats and some concerns that we need to pay attention to in this new year of 2019. Good news is that some of these things are being resolved because of some of the people that Donald Trump has put on the federal courts, some on the district court, some on the circuit court, of course, 2 people on the Supreme Court. But many of these threats are coming from local municipalities, and so that's why you need to pay attention as well to who you elect to the city council, who you elect as mayor, and a variety of others. And so I just wanted you to be aware of that. I think it's a very good summary of the 7 potential threats that pastors and churches may face in 2019. This is why we need to be aware of those, and if nothing else, another good justification for why you should support some of these religious liberty organizations. Let's get back to the phones. We'll head up to Alaska this time. KJNP, Dale, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View. Dale, are you there? Let me see if I can put Dale on hold. He might have had to step out for just a minute, and that's just fine because I recognize not everybody can stay on hold forever. We'll go to Ohio, and then we'll come back to Dale in just a minute. So let's go to Richard in Ohio. Richard, what would you like to add to our conversation?
Yes, sir. How are you today?
I am good, and I appreciate you calling.
This immigration thing, I've worked for a company in New Jersey for almost 20 years, and I've got friends that are from around the world, from everywhere from Dominican Republic, Portugal, all over South America, Russian friends, Ukrainian friends, and they all worked really hard to get in this country the right way. They didn't just walk up to the border and go, let me in. They went about it the right way. So a wall is not going to hurt. It forces people to go to a particular point and show your identification and show who you are, prove who you are, and do it the right way. These people that say, just let them in. The Alyssa Milanos of the country, the Nancy Pelosi's of the country, open your doors, let them in your home, and agree to take care of them.
That won't last very long, will it? Yeah. And again, we want a wall, but we want a door. In other words, we want a wall, but we also want a door, and we're going to let people in. We bring in 1 million people every single year. Of course, Randy in Missouri, the last hour, was talking about the fact we're also letting in people that don't even come to this country. They get shipped over here, which I'll talk about another time because that's a different issue, but it's a relevant issue. And so we are a welcoming country. And you've heard me give some of those facts and figures and statistics before because we really are dealing with a fact that here in 2015, we already had 47 million immigrants in this country. Now, some of them were illegal. A lot of those were legal. That number has got to be over 50 million now. I'll try to see if I can get a better number, but that one comes from, some pretty reliable sources. So we have no problem bringing in people from other countries, especially if they bring certain kinds of skills. Right now, we desperately need people in computers and in biotech and a variety of other areas, and we would welcome them in. And so what happens sometimes is people that we'd like to bring in, Germany, France, England, Canada, South Africa, or it could be from maybe even in China or maybe individuals in Australia or wherever, India. Those individuals, we don't bring in as many because we have such a flood of people that come here illegally. And I think you would agree, Richard, that if you're standing in line to buy a ticket in a movie theater and somebody comes and butts in front of you in line, you'd get upset about that. And I think some of these people that have waited years to do it the right way to come in this country are getting a little bit upset that people butt in line because they, as we had a battle on the border just the other day, they had to use tear gas. People rushing the border. And it just doesn't seem to me that those are the kind of people I want to bring into this country. What are your thoughts?
My thoughts are, no, I don't want them here. But if these people that want them here that way are willing to, all right, go down to the border and open your door, take them in. You are responsible for their clothing, their health care. If they commit a crime, you get charged with the same crime. Stop this tippy-toeing around. Not everybody that crosses that border are good people. Some are. Some are really, truly looking for better. Some are just there for the criminal activity. And we got to weed those out. And if you funnel them through a door and make them do it the right way and take some of these freebie incentives, we're going to give you when you get here. No. I work hard for my money. I'm a truck driver. I work a 70-hour week. And nobody gives me anything. I work for it. I don't want to take care of these people. So if these people want them that bad, open their door and let them come. But you're responsible. And the other half of my comment is Donald Trump's character. I don't know what his character truly is, but I know that Hillary was no better. Our in presidential election people or candidates has dwindled down to where is the best of the best anymore? We don't have a George Bush, a Ronald Reagan, and people beat both of those up before they were president, and after they were not president anymore, they're the greatest people on the planet.
Yeah.
I don't understand that.
No, I don't either. I was around when George Herbert Walker Bush was president. We were doing broadcast here on Point of View, and boy, the press couldn't say one nice thing about him. And boy, at his funeral, you would think he was the great saint, and I recognize how that game was played. But Richard, your point's well taken. And the other part of that, I would say, is, with all the criticism that Donald Trump has received, some of it very legitimate and appropriate, you start asking that question: who in their right mind now is going to want to run for the presidency? On the Democratic side, it's going to be huge, but it will be interesting. Even though I disagree with Mitt Romney's commentary here, Mitt Romney seems like a very honorable individual. I've interviewed him before. He sat across the table from me. Now, theologically, we have some major disagreements, and even on some political issues we do, but he's a man of integrity and an individual that has been very successful in the business world as governor and turned around the Olympics and things like that. But even he might say, do I really want to put up with this? Do I even want to run for the presidency? And, you think about the vice president right now, he might just say, I don't know, Mike Pence might say, after 8 years or 4 years of being in the Trump White House, do I want to run? And so, there's some really important questions that people need to ask of themselves if they're going to run for office. But let's see if we can head up to Alaska this time. KJNP. Dale, are you there? Yes, we don't have Dale today, so I'm going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to get into a couple of other issues because there is a lot more to cover, and one of those is by Walter Williams. I'd love to hear from some of you that are African-American because he is African-American, an economist at George Mason University, a very articulate individual, but talks a little bit about Malcolm X, and that's somebody we really haven't talked about very much here on the program, and also some of the warnings that Malcolm X issued to the African-American population, and just a little bit of history. So I thought I'd pass that one on for you, and maybe you have some comments, agree or disagree. It, I think, was intended to be a little bit provocative, but it was also quite educational. So we've posted that in case you'd like to read it. It's the fourth article we've posted on the website, pointofview.net. And as we go to a break, I hope that as we come into this new year of 2019, if you haven't supported Point of View, or even if you've supported us and occasionally, you might consider supporting us on a monthly basis. Our bills come in monthly. If our income comes in monthly, it works out really well. So again, check out what it would be like to simply be a member of the Truth Team for as little as $1 a day, $30 a month. You'll be part of that team. We'll be sending you all sorts of great resources like the Outlook magazine at the higher level. Of course, we even send these booklets each month. So find out a little bit more about that, and you can do so by going to the website, pointofview.net. If you have any comments or questions, 1-800-351-1212. We'll be back right after these messages.
It wasn't long ago, it seemed, every official decision brought religious liberty and our ability to live as faithful Christians into question. Some of us wondered how long it would be before we were literally forced to choose between obeying God or men. That pressure seems to have subsided just a bit, and now is the time not to take a breath, but to work as hard as we can for the future of our nation. Thanks to you, Point of View is doing just that. And our special thanks to those who have become members of Truth Team 360. In football, 22 guys battle it out on the field while 40 or 60,000 watch in the stands, and perhaps hundreds of thousands more watch on television. We need a special few to get out of the seats and into the game. Join today by calling 1-800-347-5151 and ask to join the Truth Team, or visit us online at pointofview.net/team. We really do need you. The nation needs you. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
You're listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again is Kerby Anderson.
Final half hour, if you'd like to join our conversation, that number is 1-800-351-1212. Earlier, we were trying to get to Dale in Alaska, KJNP. I think we have him now. Dale, thank you for joining us here on Point of View. Well, I guess we're just not getting anything from Alaska today. Let's go to Missouri. And Colin, thank you for joining us today here on Point of View.
Yes, my name's Colin Stewart, and I was talking about the border. And you can't have a country without a boundary. And if anybody can just walk in it, it belongs to anybody. And the reason I believe that these people are all trying to rush into our country, because if you get classified as a minority here, that's why they want in here. Minority is a word for cuts in line. They'll work before us. I have 4 grandkids, and my pastor, I'm a pastor, and my pastor is Mike Murdoch in in Texas, and he's on Trump's pasture. And everybody has to have champions. I think the Democrat Party needs to apologize to the families that died in the Twin Towers and the reason why you don't let just anybody come in. Ask the American Indians why you don't let anybody come in. And if they come in here, they're going to take us over. And we're going to hand them everything, the key to the city, because they'll work before the people that built this country and fought and died. And I think some people, there's a difference between stupid and ignorant. Ignorance not knowing, stupid's knowing and going ahead on with it. While they're tearing each other up and they look stupid, fighting amongst each other. They need to think about protecting the American people, and they need to strike the word minority from the workforce. That's what, if they get up here, they work for what we do, and they get our Social Security too, and they gave all that money to Iran. I watched them jump up and down for years saying death to the U.S., and we give them all our money, and we're worried about our Social Security making it. We give our money away to our enemies. I don't.
Yeah.
What
and again,
mess.
this is something else we need to really talk about because, Colin, you're right on target. One of the other issues, I'll bring this up tomorrow, is how in some respects we're a lot worse off economically in terms of the federal government. Now, the American people are doing pretty well. I mean, the median family income is higher than it's ever been before. Yes, stock market's been all over the map, and I certainly don't discount that. But the federal government just continues to run deficits, and this is where we really had no choice. Neither candidate Hillary Clinton, nor candidate Donald Trump talked anything about trying to balance the budget, trying to even get close to even reducing the federal deficits. Of course, you have the offhanded comment that, well, if we have great economic expansion, we'll eventually remove our deficit. No, we won't. I mean, there are just a lot of spending problems. And back to the point I made just a minute ago, if you look at all of the federal government, everything the government spends, and that would include things like Social Security, Medicare, and all the rest, which some people want to put in a different category. But if you count all of that, it's a $4.1 trillion budget. And so even if you look at just the so-called discretionary spending, that's $1.6 trillion. I can remember when we couldn't even imagine a government that would spend $1 trillion a year. Now it's spending $4 trillion a year and will continue to spend that when the income is more in the $3.2 to $3.5 trillion, even with the record amount of money coming into the federal treasury in October, and we'll get the November numbers, and I'll predict those will be high too, simply because as we lowered the tax rate, we increased the tax revenue. But there we are, can't even necessarily pay for all of that. But let me just real quickly, Dale, we were trying to get to in Alaska, he was asking, aren't we saving money with the shutdown? No, we're not. Because here, shutdowns always cost the taxpayer. And that may be kind of back to one of the comments we had just a minute ago from one of our callers who was, I think it was Bill, was talking about that. This is expensive. I mean, not only are we talking about not spending $5 billion for a wall, we talk about the fact that you are furloughing these workers when the government will always, I don't know if there's ever been an example where we pay them retroactively. So that means that part of the government, Department of Agriculture, Homeland Security, those individuals that are furloughed, they're just getting paid to go on vacation, essentially. But they're not getting paid right now, so we're going to hear more and more stories about how they haven't been able to make their rent payment, they haven't been able to make their car payment, how they need to go to the doctor, but they don't have any cash, whatever it might be. But the bottom line is that this sometimes costs the government a great deal. Back in 1995 and 1996, that was a shutdown, which was a long shutdown, which also involved the entire government. That cost, according to the Office of Management and Budget, about $1.4 billion. Now, this is a smaller shutdown because it's a percentage of a quarter of the government because the rest of it was funded. But you can still say that we're running up a tab and nothing is happening. And as one good example, I will be wanting to get my passport renewed. I sent it in a week ago. I got recognition from the post office that they received it. I saw they cashed my check, but it's still sitting there. Now, I'm not leaving the country anytime soon, but when I leave the country to speak in Hungary, or next fall when we have our October trip to Israel, yes, I'd like to have a passport that works, but right now the passport department is closed down. So nothing is happening. Everybody working in those agencies will eventually get paid retroactively. So in a sense, it costs the government. It really doesn't save the government, to answer the question that was asked just a minute ago. Let me come to this piece real quickly because by Walter Williams, he talks about Malcolm X. And if you're not familiar, some of you younger maybe don't even know who we're talking about. Malcolm X, he says, was a Muslim minister and a human rights activist born in 1925. He was killed by an assassin in 1965. Walter Williams says he was an advocate for black civil rights, but unlike Martin Luther King Jr., he was not that forgiving of whites for their crimes against black Americans. He did not eschew violence as a tool to achieve civil and human rights. His black and white detractors accused him of preaching racism and violence. And the point is, he says, despite the controversy, he's been called one of the greatest and most influential black Americans. Many black Americans have respect for Malcolm X. Many schools bear his name. Many streets have been named in honor of him, both here and abroad. But he says, while black Americans honor Malcolm X, one of his basic teachings goes largely unignored. And I think it's an important lesson. So he says, I'm going to quote here. So this is a quote actually from Malcolm X. Not my quote. It's not Walter Williams' quote. It's a quote from Malcolm X. Malcolm X said, the worst enemy that the Negro have is the white man that runs around here drooling at the mouth, professing to love Negroes and calling himself a liberal. And it's following these white liberals that have perpetuated problems that Negroes have. If the Negro wasn't taken, tricked, or deceived by the white liberal, the Negroes would get together and solve our own problems. I only cite these things, he says, to show you that in America, the history of the white liberal has been nothing but a series of trickery designed to make Negroes think that the white liberal was going to solve our problems. Our problem will never be solved by the white man, unquote. And so the point he's making is, Walter Williams, I love what he says here. Here's a historic tidbit for those younger than I am. He's 83 years of age, by the way, if you're not familiar. He said, in black history, we've been called ourselves several different names. Among the most respectable were colored, Negro, black, African-American. And he says he remembers one of his teachers in junior high school actually having the class go through page by page through a textbook and correcting each instance when the word Negro was printed with lowercase n. He said in Malcolm X's day and mine, Negro was a proud name not used derisively by blacks as it is today. But the point he's making is this. The quote, we may not have liked the way he used the word Negro, but he certainly is saying that this is what Walter Williams' point is, and that is finding solutions to our own problems. And he says the most devastating problem in the African-American community right now, he says, is the breakdown of the black family, wherein 75% of blacks are born to single, often young mothers. I might just point in passing that even though that percentage is very high in the African-American population, it's also getting much higher in the Latino population and even in the Anglo population. And he says, if you go back and look at the Encyclopedia of Social Science, back in the 1930s, during the end of the Great Depression, only about 11% of black children were born to unwed mothers. As late as the 1950s, female-headed households only were about 18%. Today, it's closer to 70%. And so his argument is, if we want to solve the problem, they're not going to be solved by the white liberals. It's going to be solved by us, that is, the African-American community, addressing this issue of children born out of wedlock. So anyway, it's one very interesting article. I only gave you a brief summary of a very long article that educates you about Malcolm X, but also talks about what he thinks is the worst enemy of the black people. We'll be right back.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. Since 2012, First Liberty Institute has been investigating the rise in the number and severity of domestic attacks on religion. Each year, that investigation is compiled into our annual survey. We started that survey because wherever we went, people would tell us that they didn't think there was a genuine threat to religious liberty in our country. We call it Undeniable, the Survey of Religious Hostility to Religion in America. In the past year, the total number of documented attacks on religious liberty has increased by over 15%. Over the past 5 years, we have seen an alarming 133% increase. Of the 1,400 cases documented in Undeniable, you will see a myriad of faiths represented: Christian, Jewish, Muslim, and Sikh, among others. Religious hostility in America does not seem to discriminate. But there is hope. First Liberty is battling for religious freedom in court, but you can join that fight by simply educating yourself and others about the rights we each have and how we can preserve them. If you haven't yet, I'd encourage you to go to firstliberty.org today and download your copy of the 2017 edition of Undeniable, or order a free copy for your friend. Despite the mounting hostility, First Liberty is prepared to stand against these relentless attacks for as long as it takes. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Guide at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Covered a lot of issues in the last couple of hours, and again, if you find yourself saying, I have to read some of this for myself, again, we have those articles posted on our website, and as I've mentioned before, some of the resources that we've made available to those of you that are donors, for example, one on the subject of immigration, really just to help you think about it biblically. What about all the verses that talk about rule of law as well as compassion to the widows, the orphans, and the aliens in the land? Of course, we've talked about to capitalism and socialism, that booklet. But I wanted to get into a topic that is going to surface now, and that is the subject of drug abuse. That's the latest booklet that has yet to be mailed out. So if you haven't received it yet, it's coming in the mail. So again, if you are already a donor, you'll be getting that one. But if you're not, might consider what you do this year in 2019 to support this ministry, because we love to send those booklets to those of you that give, especially at the $45 a month level. But we are now facing a very significant medical epidemic. And the reason is that we are starting to do, again, something that was done in the past during the 1950s. Those of you that are older, if I say thalidomide, you go, I know what you're talking about here. Some of you are younger, probably have never heard about this. But back in the 1950s, a sleeping pill called thalidomide was given to pregnant women. And many people have referred to that as one of the darkest episodes in the area of pharmacological research. Thalidomide, it turns out, was a teratogen, and a teratogen is something that causes malformations. And at the time, they didn't know that. And so they would actually prescribe this sleeping pill called thalidomide to individuals. It made individuals sleepy and relaxed. And so newborn mothers, mothers that were going to give birth to newborns, I should say, would actually use those. But what happened is when the baby was born, they were born without limbs. And so these malformed limbs developed, and it was very quickly understood that indeed that particular teratogen, which caused the malformations. Well, now we have another teratogen on the market that has the potential to do the very same thing. It's called marijuana. Again, what's so interesting here is some research now being done, and interestingly enough, it was an undercover investigation done by Christian Institute, actually done by the University of Colorado, in which they began to watch what was happening with the commercial business of selling marijuana, cannabis. And they found that in some cases, women pretending to suffer from morning sickness were encouraged to take cannabis or marijuana. And so as a result, they began to realize we're prescribing something that is a teratogen, just like thalidomide. And so these particular cannabis-based medicines were being distributed to pregnant mothers in the United States, despite evidence that such a drug, cannabis or marijuana, can actually harm babies. Now, one of the reports said this, quote, researchers contacted cannabis dispensaries around the United States. They found in 2/3 of the cases, cannabis products were recommended for morning sickness. This cannot go well. Let's go on. The quote says, many attempted to sell the would-be mothers a version of cannabis containing THC, the chemical that, of course, gives users a high. The report goes on to say, quote, a number of women were advised that they should keep it secret from their doctors, and one was told that something going through your digestional tract will have no effect on unborn life. Really? I hope those of you out there that are listening, that are pregnant mothers, recognize that you don't want to be taking any kind of drug. You don't want to be drinking alcohol. If you've ever seen fetal alcohol syndrome, you've ever seen a crack baby, you know you don't want to do that. My parents, fortunately, were not drinkers, but my mother did smoke, and probably I was affected indirectly by some of that. But if you've ever seen some of these children, some of these babies that have been born to addicted mothers, you know the impact that that would have. And again, to make such a patently absurd statement that something that goes through your digestional tract is not going to have an impact, certainly is the case. Anyway, the report confirmed cannabis use has been linked to birth defects. Gastritis is one of those. That's where the intestines develop outside the body. Then we've also seen it linked to congenital heart conditions. Even the problem of anencephaly, that's when you have the brain that's born outside, or sometimes it's just simply missing. University of Utah professor Tori Metz said that the Institute report that there are concerns about possible long-term effects on the developing brain, impacting cognitive function, decreased academic ability later in child level. And then one emergency room doctor in California, Karen Randall, said, we are at ground zero of this new medical epidemic, which will lead to havoc. And so I thought I would mention that. She said that when you have breastfeeding mothers use marijuana, so this is even after the child is born, it gets concentrated in breast milk. There are many studies that show memory is decreased with constant use, so I guess that in 5 to 10 years, we're going to see a lot of kids with learning issues. And so, again, the Daily Mail reported recently that the Colorado researchers found about 400 calls to cannabis dispensaries where they sell marijuana. 2/3 recommended their products for morning sickness. And one of the sales operators said, edible marijuana will not hurt the child. There we're again, once again, one of those. And, of course, as we've documented in this, as well as many of the articles we've posted here, at a time when there is a desire to actually legalize marijuana, not just medical marijuana, but recreational marijuana, it's coming at a time when we recognize there are more and more studies coming out talking about the deleterious effects of marijuana. You have studies, for example, at Harvard University, at the University of Montreal, and others that have said, for example, the drug is linked to poor memory function, which could affect, the academic ability of individuals, cognitive function, decreased academic ability, and even one study that came out more recently looking at the connection of marijuana to schizophrenia. Does it mean that everybody using pot gets schizophrenia? No. Does it mean some do? Yes. And again, anxiety, depression, and all the rest. And we live in this bizarre world where now that we know more about the dangers of marijuana, and now that we know it's more potent than it was even when I was growing up as a child, we actually have more and more individuals wanting to legalize it and make it available. But perhaps the greatest medical epidemic right now surfacing into the fact that it's being prescribed to a lot of pregnant women as a cure for morning sickness, and yet the impact that it might have on their developing child could be devastating. So one more topic to put on the very important agenda every day to try to educate you about these issues. And let me encourage you to go to the website today, pointofview.net. What you'll find are the articles that we've posted here on everything from archaeology, free speech, socialism, even the African-American issue, the character of the president, as well as my commentary, which I would encourage you to read and then maybe pass on to someone in leadership. It talks about the 7 potential threats to churches in 2019. And if, as you've been listening to this program, you've learned a little bit, maybe you could consider dropping by the program and clicking that button that says donate. A single donation would be greatly appreciated in this new year of 2019, but I do want to challenge some of you to think about supporting us on a monthly basis so that we can educate you every single day, and your financial support will help us continue to bring this program to you. All available at the website, pointofview.net. The articles are there for you to read. I hope you'll take the time to copy them, pass them on to others, maybe even post them on your Facebook page or your Twitter feed as well. I want to thank Andrew and Steve for their help behind the scenes. Looking forward to our conversation tomorrow right here on Point of View.
Why should you become a partner with Point of View Radio? Because for decades, this team has made a significant difference in lives and communities across the nation. Because America is dying for lack of biblical wisdom about life and culture. You should give because your gift will make possible cutting-edge information on issues that matter, information you won't hear anywhere else. Why? Because your gift will change lives, because you'll influence our culture with biblical truth, and because you can make a difference for the future. Our nation needs a truth team very badly. Support Point of View Radio today at pointofview.net. Click on Join the Truth Team and choose your level of support. Pointofview.net. Or call 800-347-5151, 800-347-5151. Or mail that first donation to Point of View, Box 30, Dallas, Texas 75221. Box 30, Dallas 75221. Point of View is produced by Point of View Ministries.